Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Take your coffee and cake with you. Plenty of space here in front. Don't be afraid. It'll be a tough fight today, but not between us and you, but between our two guests. So you can be actually, you should be rather close to see it firsthand. So once again, good morning, everybody. I guess I do not need to introduce myself today. There are people, participants of Prague Conference on Political Economy. There are people from the let's say friends of the Liberální Institute and the CEVRO Institut. Well, in any case, we have this morning session today to debate transition because it's a crucial problem of today, I believe, not only to be focused on contemporary, let's say, political battles, but to actually see whether we have learned something. But before we start this, let me introduce a little bit this place. We are now inside this beautiful facility of CEVRO Institut, which is a private college established 3-4 years ago, which has an aspiration to become a leading voice of free market thought. The goal of this college is to provide people who are interested in politics, and not necessarily party politics, but just people who want to, influence current affairs, to equip them with knowledge about what freedom means. I'm a member of faculty of this school. I am professor at what is called the Department of Economics and Management here, and I was instrumental in forming the economic part of the program. The school has so far 2 bachelor's and 2 master's programs in law and public administration on the one hand, and political science on the other. There is a hope that we'll be able to design a 3rd program, both on a BA and MA level, that'll be more focused on economics, so not pure economics, but sort of institutionally based, property-based economics. That's our goal for the coming years. The school seeks to be a dynamic little family-like place with a couple of hundreds of students who can enjoy the beauty of this small setting. We want to be as open as possible. The first sign of it is a joint summer school, which this school does with Florida State University this summer, and I hope much more is coming. Now we haven't managed to lead our students through both MA and BA levels so far. We are now in a moment when the first students who are freshmen 3 years ago are now about to graduate this late spring, and then continue in these newly designed master programs. And I'm a big fan of this institution. It's a private college, hence there is pretty much no bureaucracy. It's all everybody dedicated, and it's completely up to us to make this place a little tiny island of free market, classical, liberal, conservative scholarship or teaching. So if anybody in the future sees an opportunity to come up with a common project, please approach me. I'll be very happy to help to set it up. So we have 2 guests today. two leading experts on transition. I'll start with our foreign guests for those who couldn't see his wonderful lecture on Friday at the Prague School of Economics. Professor Svetozar Pejovich is a co-founder of what we call economics of property rights, a man who has authored numerous books and hundreds of articles in professional journals, a famous scholar whose name you can find in textbooks. So I'm very happy he accepted my invitation and came to Prague to give a couple of public lectures and then teach a course on economic policy for our students at the University of Economics. Our second guest and today's speaker is well known to all Czechs, citizens, and I'm sure his fame also crossed the national borders. Dr. Dušan Tříska, who is let's say a brain of the Czech transition process, and especially the Czech process of so-called voucher privatization. And I decided when thinking about the program of the third day of the Prague Conference on political economy to use this coincidence actually. And the coincidence is that Professor Pejovich a couple of years ago wrote an article that got published in the Independent Review, which is a peer-reviewed publication by the Independent Institute. The chief editor of that journal is our good friend Professor Robert Hicks, a leading American economic historian. And the article was about privatization of stolen goods in Central Europe. And by the way, I was approached by Bob Hicks when Professor Pejovich submitted the article to comment on it. So I'm the anonymous referee on this paper. And actually, I had some comments, critical comments, which exactly then were echoed in what Dr. Tříska and Václav Klaus have written. So I almost killed your article, but it got published. Perhaps they got another referee who was even more supportive than I was. So that's, I guess, a secret which I can reveal this morning. Yeah. If I knew that it was you who wrote it, I would never dare to have any critical comments. But that's the beauty of double-blind process of commenting and refereeing journals. And Dušan Tříska, together with Václav Klaus, published a reply to this article last year, I believe it was, perhaps it's already 2 years, in the Czech professional journal Politická ekonomie, Czech Journal of Economics, I believe is the translation. And they actually, both Tříska, Klaus, and Pejovich, they didn't have a chance to talk about it, and I guess because they both are on the same, on the same side of a barricade, let's say, put it this way. It'll be extremely interesting to see how people who generally agree with each other, how can they have disputes over transition? So where the problem is, what issues can be sort of viewed from different perspective, even if people generally agree with what has to be done, such as privatize, re-establish markets, and so on and so forth. So today, I'll give these two gentlemen a chance to clarify their positions, and then I'll be very happy if you, from the audience, from numerous countries, European countries, many of whom spend some time focusing on transition and privatization processes may join the discussion. Right? The structure of today's morning will be that first Professor Pejovich will restate his position in something like 20 minutes. Then Dr. Tříska would present his position, and then the fight can start, which I guess will be very enjoyable and intellectually challenging. I guess I'm not going to waste more time. Professor Pejovich, the floor is now yours.
Well, Professor Sima was very kind, to introduce me in a way in which I feel embarrassed because I could never deliver as well as he said that I will. I also think that invitation to Prague is something that it would be a sin not to accept. It's really the most beautiful city in Europe. It's not only a beautiful city, but the island of sanity in a sea of social democracy. Same as now Texas is island of sanity in the country run by Obama, the savior. I want to talk about how I perceived transition from socialism to capitalism, and what I think were the major problems that held it back. You know, after many decades of economic deprivation and political oppression, socialist regimes in the Central and Eastern Europe came to an end in 1991. The end of socialism created an enormous opportunity, a chance to develop better institutions and provide better living for people who were oppressed for so long. And indeed, new ruling elites immediately announced plans to start economic reforms. The problem, I think, the major initial problem was one that the West would not leave you alone. The West wasted no time in joining in to tell you how to reform your countries. And Western government, Western transition experts, overnight, everybody was a transition expert. And international organizations, just look at the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. They assumed that it was their birthright to tell you what to do. There were only two countries that were able to manage to do things on their own, your country and Estonia, thanks to two great leaders at that time, Klaus and Lahr. Now, the most repeated message that came from the West in the early 1990s was privatize, privatize, privatize. Indeed, privatization became, or has been, the key policy in post-socialist Central and Eastern Europe. On this point, unfortunately, an important point was overlooked, that it was much more profitable, less costly, to try to develop new firms never state-owned rather than to bother with state-owned firms. And I think that whatever development has occurred in Eastern Europe since 1990s, the most of that could be thanks to new firms that started after the freedom, after the socialism ended. But in this article, I analyzed the contribution of the privatization of state-owned firms to the institutional changes. And my key finding is that, I'm going to say it very carefully, the key finding is that instead of reducing the transaction costs of moving privatized assets to their most efficient uses, the privatization of state-owned firms had slowed down institutional restructuring in Central and Eastern Europe. Now, the relative failure of the privatization of state-owned firms can be attributed, and I attribute actually, to three factors that I'm going to explain. And I say relative failure. Why? Because, of course, you can tell me that you'll be growing since the end of socialism. Look, once you change the ownership of the firm from a state ownership to private, you are going to grow. The question is, are you growing as fast as you could have? I think the major reason for relative failure were three. First, the influence of neoclassical economics. Second, the absence of decommunization. And third, the unwillingness or inability of the new elite to recognize who has the right of ownership in state-owned assets. Because if you do not give the right of ownership to the proper owners, you have missed the major point of privatization. Now, let me, this is other. Let me talk first about the role of classical economics. At the very outset of economic reforms, something quite predictable happened. The majority of Western advisors, most economists working for international organizations, and most of the new leaders in Central and Eastern Europe, again with the exception of Czech Republic and Estonia, were more familiar with the prevailing mainstream economics, which was neoclassical economics, than with other methods of economic analysis, such as the new institutional school, Austrian economics, and public choice. Then, intentionally or not, the process of transition in general and the privatization of state-owned firms in particular reflected this familiarity with neoclassical economics. The problem was, examples are, for example, Washington Consensus, Sachs' Big Bang all over the region, Balcerowicz's Big Bang in Poland, and Menziger's gradualism in Slovenia. The neoclassical way of thinking explained what I think was the major mistake of the transition. The neoclassical way of thinking explains the so-called holy trinity of the process of transition: macroeconomic stability, privatization, and price liberalizations. Why? Well, institutional restructuring, just ask yourself, what does institutional restructuring really means? What does economic reform mean? It means not changing policy, but changing institutions, creating a new set of incentives to which people are going to respond. Now, if institutional restructuring means changing institutions, it means that reform, by definition, is a purposeful destabilization of the prevailing rules of the game. And if you want to impose macroeconomic stability policies on this process, you are going to be counterproductive. You are not going to allow the institutions to work themselves out in a relative chaos. And I think that the only way to explain why people insisted on macroeconomic stability is because they used it. The only way it could be explained by the neoclassical assumption that the new equilibrium will be created immediately, which is nonsense. The objective of price liberalization requires that contracts are enforced and that the incentive effects of different institutions and individuals are recognized. And in most Central and East European countries, the enforcement of contracts was very weak. So the price liberalizations, the purpose of price liberalization to the economists means to somehow get to scarcity prices. But scarcity prices require free markets and enforceable contracts. If contracts are not enforceable, free prices will not necessarily be scarcity prices. And finally, on privatization, in the absence of credible private property rights, it's not enough just to make the law, let's have private property rights. Ask all those Russians who are in jail. It's not enough to make law, to say the property rights have to be credible, mean enforced. And in the absence of credible property rights, privatization cannot be expected to perform its major economic function, which is to put resources into most efficient use. The whole meaning of private property rights in terms of economics only, not morals or ethics, is to move resources from lower to higher valued uses. And tomorrow, when I go to lecture to your students, I will explain that process in some detail. It's very long. No. In evaluating the economic efficiency of privatization that happened in this region, the fundamental issue is the development of credible property rights and the enforcement of contracts. And then, if you look at the index of economic freedom and the literature in general, you'll find out there are only two countries, I repeat, there are only two countries in the entire region in which property rights were secure and contracts enforced. Again, Czech Republic and Estonia. The neoclassical approach to privatization has failed. Let me go to my second point, the decommunization. I started by saying that institutional reforms mean, transition means, or economic reforms means changing institutions. And institutions are changed by people. So in order to understand what happened to the process of transition, it's very important to ask who are the people who carried out those changes. Because those people, their incentives, their culture, their preferences, their vision, had something to do with what happened in the region. Now, the carriers of change are common institutional entrepreneurs. Primarily decision makers in government, bureaucrats, managers of business firms, labor union leaders, I'm talking about what happened here, and other social engineers. The point of great importance is that significant number of those people were, back in 1990, holdovers from socialist regimes. Why was it this case, and what are the implications? After 1989, communist parties in Central Europe were not outlawed. And most important, the communist parties were not declared to have been criminal organizations. In the absence of decommunization in this region, contrast with the denazification in Germany at the end of the World War II. Their National Socialist Party was outlawed and top leaders hanged or put in jail, and the lesser functionaries, especially members of SS, were barred or prevented from holding important positions in public life. The Cold War stopped this process before it was completed. However, an important part of it was done, something that never happened in Eastern Europe. In contrast, Communist Party leaders in Central Eastern Europe were not brought to justice. Former nomenclaturists were not excluded from public policy making by law. The bureaucracy of Central and East European countries has hardly changed since the end of socialism. Scholars who belong to the communist parties did an about-face, affiliated themselves with the United Nations, who else? World Bank and other organizations, and they were quickly acclaimed as internationally recognized transition experts. Their culture was not culture of free market, their culture was culture of collectivism. Thus, the carriers of change in Central and Eastern Europe, since the outset of economic reforms in the early 1990s, and again, you can take Estonia and Czech Republic out, partially at least, have been individuals who used to be members of the communist parties before the end of socialist rule. Whatever the facade of words behind which they hide, whatever the lip service they pay to free markets, whatever the true convictions are, these people have comparative advantage in economic terms in making and implementing policies that favor collectivism over free market. Even when I am not stupid enough to assume that some people have not changed because they really believe that communism was wrong. But they are product of the past. And whenever they have a problem, their nature, their culture says, look up to the government, not to the market. And especially I find it very annoying, especially because I lived for 12 years under a communist regime, which was probably less oppressive than yours, but oppressive enough to send me as far as Texas. Some people say, well, I joined the Communist Party not because I believe, but because I had to make a career. Be careful. Those who joined because they believe in communism, they are the people who oppressed us. But those who joined because they wanted to make a career, they are the people who reduced the cost of keeping the oppressors in the power. Give you two quotes, and then I go to the third point. There is a Polish economist, and I may pronounce the name, Kolotko, I believe is the name, who was a member of the Communist Party, and after the fall of socialism, he became a transition expert working for United Nations, promoting free market. Here is what he said. If there is a choice between developing free market institutional arrangements spontaneously, hike, or in a way directed by the government, then the latter option by government is more suitable in the case of post-socialist countries. Even if a small government is sometimes better than the larger one, often governments cannot be downsized without causing economic contraction and deterioration in the standard of living. After living in communist country for 4 years, he is in fact telling us that unless we have more government, our standard of living is going to deteriorate. How stupid one can be. And here is the quote from a Chicago University professor and Nobel Prize winner Stigler, who said, "The state is a potential resource or threat to every industry in the society. With its power to prohibit or compel, to take or give money, the state can and does selectively help or hurt a vast number of industries." And this is what Obama is doing now to my country. He is, instead of market deciding who are the winners, who are the losers, he is deciding that. He is saying we are going to bail out General Motors, but not Ford. He is saying we are going to bail out one investment bank, but not another one. The table I gave you, let us look at the table because it's very important. In that sense, I do not believe, well, I believe that every scientific proposition has to be proven. You see, when I come to my class, the first day in class, I always tell my students, and I have done that for 39 years, you owe to yourself not to believe what I tell you, unless I can prove it to you. So, table 1, I think this table just 4 here, supports the argument. Let us see what it does. I use the the Heritage Foundation Index of Economic Freedom. 1996 was the first year it was published, and I use 05 as the year because that's when I published the article. Now, the numbers, 1 is the freer the country, the lower the number. So number 1 will be really pure capitalism. Number 5 is the worst situation. Under totals, look down at the averages. In 1996, the total for all East European countries was 3.3. By 2005, it improved substantially to 2.8. 3.3 is classified as partially unfree, and 2.8 is classified as partially free. But as I talk to you about the culture of former communists, and I say, not because they are hiding, but even if they were true in their conversions, they grew up in a culture of collectivism. So their comparative advantage, intuitive reaction is what? To believe in government regulations and also to have doubts about private property rights. So those total numbers, these give you freedom, develop how free the countries are. They show clearly that countries are now, that you are much freer than you were back in 1996. But if you look at the property rights and regulations, you get a totally different picture. The average for property rights was 2.9 in 96. It got worse. Then to 3.3 in 05. And so did regulations. All right. Let me finally say a few words about privatization. Who owns privatized firms? If one is to ask me what is my field in economics, I would say economics of private property rights, or law and economics, which comes to the same. And I understand that next year you are going to have a great law and economics professor here, Professor Epstein, whom you are going to enjoy hugely. I know. He's one of the most brilliant men today. Next to Mr. Posner, probably the best legal mind in America. But let me go to that. Who owns privatized firms? You see, here you have to make a clear-cut distinction between the West and the East. In the West, free society, which you were not in 1990. In the West, public leaders acquire state-owned assets within the constraints of their constitutions. Given those constraints, the presumption is, it has to be, that public leaders have the consent of their citizens to sell state-owned assets and to allocate the proceeds. That's what Mrs. Thatcher did. Moreover, the transfer of state-owned assets in the West occurs in a market-friendly and well-established institutional environment, in which the transaction cost of moving privatized asset to highest value, the most efficient users, are low. So that even if privatized assets were not sold initially to the user who can put it to the most efficient use, the prevailing incentives and financial markets will move those assets from less productive to more productive users. In the former socialist states, state-owned assets either had been stolen from their legitimate owners or had been produced by socialist planners at the request of communist leaders. The presumption, therefore, has to be that the communist leader had only the consent of party members, if at all, to acquire, produce, and use productive assets. Leave the people out. All other citizens were compelled to bear the cost of submitting to their rulers' preferences. The true owner of state-owned assets are all the individuals. The real owners are all individuals who were forced to bear the cost of producing. This group of individuals includes all citizens except members of the Communist Party. By implication, acting as an intermediary for the true owner, the state might sell those assets, but it has no right to keep the proceeds or even to choose how to own, because that will be allocated somebody else's assets without permission. The state's moral obligation is to return the value of state-owned assets to all citizens. Moreover, it's more than moral obligation. I argue in this paper that's economically efficient, that economic efficiency also calls for the return of state-owned assets to all citizens. Quickly, let me say why. 1994 in Kikos. It's a European journal. And those of you who are economists, you know, if you publish something in 1994, it was written 2 years before. It takes that long to go through. So what I said in 1992 about privatization was when everybody else was saying something different. At that time I did claim that you cannot have successful privatization unless you develop an efficient market for institutions. Yet what happened in the East, the privatized assets were sold by the state, and the state used different methods of doing that. Direct sales, equity offerings, contract with strategic partners, internal buyouts, and vouchers. All those methods, except one, vouchers, do not satisfy the requirement of selling assets on behalf of the true owners, because they don't return the proceeds to true owners. There is important common trait of all methods of privatization in Eastern Europe, except countries that use vouchers, was the same. They sold the assets and spent proceeds to help support specific groups, development funds, retirement funds, the budget, whatever else. Notice that all those proceeds that belong to somebody else, the state decided how to use the money that belonged to others, which means that the state did exactly the same the communist state did, stole it. The voucher was the only one that did exactly right. The property went back to the owners, although you did not exclude members of the Communist Party, but it's a small mistake compared to others. The vouchers did go, the property went to those who are true owners. And there is another beautiful aspect about voucher methods. Capitalism cannot develop without a strong middle class. With a strong middle class that has stakes in the system. By giving people private property rights in the national wealth, you are creating a wealthy, a middle class that has stakes in the system. I'll give you a brief example. I was at a conference in Hungary in the early 1990s, and the Hungarian Minister for Privatization said to me, to my question, that the state was not in business of giving away the national wealth. Just think. I asked him the following. I said, are you choosing to ignore the fact that privatizing state-owned assets and giving the proceeds to all citizens does not change the national wealth? It only changes legal owners. Nothing else. The morality of transferring the proceeds from the sale of state-owned assets to the owners, to me, is clear. Economic efficiency is clear too, to those of you who have studied economics. And that I will talk more in the next 4 days. Now, there is one problem with voucher systems. You should not just look at your country. Look at Russia. If you read a chapter from Marx about the original accumulation, and you look at the voucher privatization in Russia, you think, well, that Marx really was a prophet. He expected to observe it. The problem with the voucher privatization is that the people who, after 4 years of oppression, who have absolutely no appreciation of private property rights. Yes, there are some lingering memories in Czech Republic. There is lingering sense of the rule of law in Czech Republic, but not in the part of the Balkans where I come from, not in Russia, not in most. The further south, the further east and southeast you travel, the worse. The memories are worse. So what happened? The people who get vouchers, many of them have no idea what they have. They cannot relay this to the future earnings of the firms. And they can be quickly exploited and taken over by the mafia. And that's what happened. So the issue, even Milton Friedman recognized that. He told me, he told many of us, in the last few years of his life, I made a mistake. I should have said, develop the rule of law and then privatize. I would say this much though, that you did have memories of the rule of law. But we are talking about privatization, what's happening in Eastern Europe, not in the Czech Republic. As Klaus told us once in Montpellier Society, don't put us in the Eastern Europe. Prague is to the west of Vienna. So I think that it is very important, if you look what happened in the rest of Eastern Europe, to talk about the rule of law. The problem is that communist rule has also completely destroyed people's faith in law. The law means, what is the purpose of law? To protect you from the government. What was the purpose of law in communist country? To control you. So people have totally lost belief in laws. It's very difficult. So what comes first, chicken or egg? Mr. Triska believed chicken. In my paper I said egg, but I'm not sure anymore. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Pejovich. And now, without further delays, I'd like to ask to come to the podium Dr. Triska to talk about chickens.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin with a few comments. One is that, as already said, we wrote a relatively sharp polemic, we meaning Václav Klaus and myself, with the paper of Svetozar Pejovich. However, in the very beginning of the paper, we tried to express that we know who Mr. Pejovich is, that we know with whom we are dealing, you know, and that we, at least myself, should rather speak for myself, I regard myself to be a maybe not very talented, but still student, you know, of Mr. Pejovich and his writings on property rights and economics of law and economics, you know, opened our eyes in the 70s and 80s, and to some extent he is responsible for what's going on in the 90s in this country in this sense, you know, and we appreciate that. In the paper, in the relatively sharp polemic with Mr. Pejovich, we concluded with appendix where we summarized his work and his CV and his biography, his writing, including the today quoted Kiklos paper from 1994, and to explain, you know, that academically speaking, at least, we cannot compare with him because of the intellectual capacity and his position in academia and so on. At the same time, we said that certain topics we raised because exactly we know who is Mr. Pejovich, and that there were questions, topics, and issues that we wouldn't even open with anybody smaller than Mr. Pejovich, because of the danger of misunderstanding, because the as already Professor Shima said, in fact, the debate, however sharp, is far beyond, to be understood by socialists, because they wouldn't recognize, they wouldn't know, they would understand what we discuss about, because this is so fine and so detailed and so refined discussion that this is a discussion of real experts. If we may compare with Mr. Pejovich, of course, I would love to, one day compare with his work, and this is a definitely historic moment for me, and you should know that Václav Klaus will receive Mr. Pejovich tomorrow at the Prague Castle. He will meet him, and he will appreciate in this formal way what we know about this great gentleman we have today with us. At the same time, the criticism is there, and I should also again stress that however kind Mr. Pejovich was, not speaking about the criticism about Czech way of privatization, Czech way of privatization, he was relatively kind to the processes, as you heard today with Czechoslovakia, then Czech Republic and Estonia. We, in our reply, we could be happy with that, but we, generally speaking, to summarize, I defended Russia. Already criticized, today criticized, the process in Russia. I think it's unfair. I think that there's some misconception in it, and that there are some things that are missing and should be addressed. So I'm not defending, in this sense, Czech process of privatization or transformation, because, as we heard, we were the best in the region. I'm defending, in some, Russia, and the process, we can observe in Russia, and I will try to speak about this. And one more comment is about neoclassical economics and how it is being applied in this region. And here I have to say that definitely I'm much more friendly terms with neoclassic economics than definitely Mr. Pejovich is. I'm teaching microeconomics, advanced micro, but I'm teaching law and economics also. I'm teaching economics of contracting, but somehow I would always defend, this neoclassical concept and the so-called textbook economics that I don't think you have nice term for the textbook economics. There is nothing worse in the world than textbook economics, if I understand, your writings. So I would rather be more tolerant to this. One more comment is that why this type of discussion is still relevant. For many reasons, in fact. Not only that we would like to understand what happened in this region during the last 20 years, and not only because I always proudly say that I visited North Korea several times, and I'm advising the North Korean government, I'm explaining to the North Korean government how we did it, And 3 days ago, I had a lecture for North Korean delegation in Prague, explaining to them about the relationship between political system and economic, and about economics in general, and how we did it again, and what lessons can be taken from our experience, and what lessons can be maybe exported elsewhere, including North Korea. But not only North Korea. Now we have, if I may comment on recent development in your country, we have well, Texas, Texas, United States. But we have now, a huge supply of recently nationalized American banks, and perhaps, voucher privatization will be, at hand, and may assist, the process of privatization in America. not to speak about Germany, because it should. And also, as an initial comment, is that it seemed to us that just like we are strongly influenced by the experience of what happened in my country, in the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia, it seemed to us several times that Mr. Pejovich understands very deeply and follows very deeply and feels very strongly about Yugoslavia. Not only the country is different and was different, and the starting point was very different from ours, and we should understand that Czechs, to make a trip to Yugoslavia, we couldn't distinguish trip to Yugoslavia from the trip to America. It was as difficult for us to go to Yugoslavia and as to America. Yugoslavia for us was a free country. You could buy Newsweek in Yugoslavia, unlike in Czech Republic. And so this is one point. Second is that the development in Yugoslavia was definitely very unfortunate, very costly, economically speaking. And of course, then if you observe Yugoslavia, then you may criticize it very, very easily. And the experience is very unfortunate. And I understand that it may hurt. It may hurt personally people who feel very strongly. And you know that my name is Dusan, and it's a Serbian name. And so all my family always felt very strongly with Serbia. And my last introductory comment, and then I will say goodbye to you after my introductory comment, is that in order to criticize Mr. Pejovich, I apologize for the term criticize. In order to, we somehow have to sort of structuralize his paper in order to have better access, to the criticism, with all the dangers that we misinterpret. Mainly because of these refined details, and on which the analysis and the discussion is taken care of. So we sort of, but then there was a brief exchange of mails with Mr. Pejovich and myself, where he again, said a few things that I quoted recently in my paper for Vienna Conference on Far East Asia. But I proudly said that we exchange, a discussion, and refer to that in that. So the 4 points we somehow summarized. One is that there's a thesis and a hope and stereotype that private enterprise is always better efficient, more efficient than the state-owned enterprise. Again, we all would agree with that, that it's a political statement. But on the level of the institutional discussion that we are having here, we can put many question marks about this. Is it so that every private enterprise is more efficient than the state-owned enterprise? Number two, post-communist government is generally free to decide about sequencing and timing of the transformation measures, or it has it under control. To a great extent, it's up to the post-communist government to decide what to do and in what order to do. Third is the concept of communism and the role of communists in the society. We heard this very plastically today from Mr. Pejovich himself. And fourth is, to what extent, again, the state, post-communist state, when transforming the society, has the capacity to decide how to distribute the property, to what extent it has under its control. So I would start with the most sensitive topic of the communism and the role of communists and former communism in this region. And this was the most sensitive part of the most sensitive chapter of our polemica, and Václav Klaus, because he is a genuine politician, then I had to force him to include this chapter in this country because of the sensitiveness of this issue. And our position is that the role of former communists, and we know, that former communists were members of the teams, on both sides of the barricade, so to speak, and we strongly disagree with Mr. Pejovich's observation and criticism. The borderline, the line between the two, if we had two kinds of barricades, was rather between, say, Václav Klaus and many colleagues from our Institute for Economics and so, and on the other hand would be our arch enemy, in the sense enemy, our arch opponent would be rather Václav Havel. No communists, it was Václav Havel and the team of anti-communist dissidents. This was the team of people. This was a group of people that they were in debate, in discussion, and so on. It wasn't and we suspected, and maybe this is a news for you. What made you, Mr. Pejovich, believe, so strongly about exactly this issue? And we said it could be because, we didn't say it was the reason, we speculated that the experience of Yugoslavia, that in Yugoslavia, and this is more a question to you, I'm starting the discussion. Definitely we have some strong points. In this case we speculate, and we may ask you, I was asking you, wasn't it so that the Communist Party of Yugoslavia wasn't to that extent alienated from the rest of the nation, as was the case in Czechoslovakia, at least since after 1968? Czech communists didn't believe anything. They had no ideology whatsoever. They didn't trust socialism. And I'm asking you, I'm definitely asking you, wasn't it so that Yugoslav socialists were genuine socialists? And in this sense, they could be somehow indoctrinated. In this sense, they could have some biases. They could have some kind of thinking that definitely Czech communists, in our experience, definitely didn't have. So that's so much for the sake of decommunization. We appreciate strongly in this paper. Again, it was also sort of, maybe some courage was in this paper published by Václav Klaus in particular, that we appreciated your stubborn, long-term, consistent, genuine anti-communism. And we compare it with the anti-communism which emerged in our country after 1990. Although the old newborn anti-communists emerged, that when we look, Mr. Pejovich's concept of anti-communism, it's a genuine concept. We have to study it, we have to understand it. We have to understand it. At the same time, Yugoslavian communists were different from the Czech ones. And as Eskimos recognize 500 kinds of snow, we distinguish, 500 kinds of communists and communist parties. Polish communists were different. Grigory Kolosko, wherever you criticize Grigory Kolosko, I have to compare, he's my friend, I have to compare him with our Czech communist experts on economics. And Grigory Kolosko, for me, is a man who understands economics, to some extent. He knows what supply and demand curve is, unlike Czech communists, the official communists. So much for the communism. Very important issue. Of course, fundamental part of the problem. Very little understood so far, and very rarely approached, and somehow analyzed in this country. From the 4 remaining points, I would like to stress the most important one and the least understood one. And this is the property right protection. We all understand that property rights, this is the fundament of the society, and that there are no property rights without property rights protection, of course. The problem is how to start, whether chicken and egg. When you are in 1990 and you are living in a country like Czechoslovakia where 100% of absolutely everything is state-owned. How to begin, how to start, how to start. Will you start with establishing a legal frame which will guarantee property rights? Is it ever possible? How you do it? Can you import it from Brussels? We were offered legislation from Brussels. You simply take it, translate these 4,000 pages into Czech. I was asked, as a deputy minister of finance, why don't you translate this, 2,000 pages, in Czech? I said, I don't have enough translators. This is technically impossible. We don't have the terminology. We don't have anything. We don't have anything. And in our paper, almost ironically, and I dare say, given your status, of course, inappropriately, I raised my observation that if the society, and I repeat it over and over, and I repeat it I said the first time to my federal parliament in 1990, and I repeat it ever since. If I were ever able to establish a legal frame which has the capacity to avoid good and sanction evil, if I ever was able to do anything like that, if I was able to establish legal frame which could protect property rights, and I'm speaking about Russia, I'm speaking about Latvia, about Kazakhstan, all these countries, not only mine. So why on earth would I, if I was able to do it, why on earth would I transform anything? I would be happy. I would be perfectly satisfied. I have a system which awards good and sanctions evil, and so this is the point. And the point is that this situation, this legal frame, this institutional frame, is the outcome of the process. Can hardly be, as you put, prerequisite of the process. And this is the reverse order, exactly reverse order that according to which you criticize not only Czech Republic to a great extent, but mainly Russia and countries like that. When I visited North Korea, this is my perhaps last comment. Last time it was 2006. We were 4 experts we were financed by European Union. I apologize for that. I do these type of things, lack of character, of course. But we were 4 of us, 3 Westerners and myself from Eastern Europe, Central Eastern Europe, and immediately those guys but they all agreed that something fundamental has to change in North Korea, and they would immediately stress, but legal frame first. Property rights protection first. In North Korea, but they don't know what property rights ever are, but they don't know, what ownership is, they don't know what entrepreneurship, that doesn't exist, Not to speak about this is perhaps, my final statement, that in the time of transformation, you don't have any government. The government is emerging. You are creating not only the economy, not private ownership, but you are building a new government. There is no such thing as government. Government is emerging, doesn't exist. So I believe that the discussion will be lively, and I apologize for criticizing Mr. Pejovich because he's my hero. You understand that enough. Thank you for all your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Striska, for your comments. I believe we'll now proceed in the following way. I guess Mr. Pejovich wants to respond briefly now. Then we'll open the floor for discussion, question, comments, and then we'll see how far we can go.
the purpose of a debate? There are two from experience. Two people come to debate each other, and each wants to defend his position. I have no use for this kind of debate. The purpose of debate is to seek the truth, which means I'm not married to my point of view, and I do know that he is not married to his point of view. We want to know, given our relative positions, how to progress to understand the issues better. So there are many things that I still disagree with Mr. Iska, many issues that I do agree with him now. Let me talk about it. There is one major difference between him and Klaus on one hand and myself. They are in the front line. I'm in the ivory tower. In a war, the frontline officers see the situation always quite differently from the staff officers. And so, I believe, they see the situation very different from the way we, who write at universities, do. Does it make one of us right and another wrong? No. We are in business of trying to find the truth. Now, let me go down. I was in Slovenia giving a paper, and a student raised the question. He said, Dr. Pejovich, you seem to treat government as if, you talk about government as if the government was no better than the mafia. And my answer was, I will never do that, because that would not be fair to the mafia. That's what, in response to that, I wrote an article then called The Case for the Mafia. I could not publish it in America, nobody was interested. I published it in two languages, Italian and Albanian. You figure out why. And my argument was that mafia is more efficient because it has competition, competing families. And also, mafia, the government will subsidize, tax you until you go out of business and then subsidize you. Mafia does not want you to become unprofitable. They want you to continue making profits, so they could always take part of it. And will never bother to subsidize you at somebody else's expense. All right. So I do make the case for the mafia. So it shows you what I think of the government, really. Now, on the neoclassical economics, I think I misled Mr. Tiska. I am as close to Friedman as I am to Hayek. I think, and I believe very strongly, that neoclassical economics has made unique and indispensable contribution to our understanding of the working of free markets. However, it is ill-suited to discuss and to help us to understand the process of transition. Why? Because it deals with only one set of institutions and assumes zero transaction cost. Once you talk about institutional change, you're talking about different institutions that generate different incentives, and different incentives create different transaction costs. At that point, neoclassical economics becomes really not very useful. Again, it does not rule it out. Look, when you have a stomach problem, you don't go to an eye doctor. But you still need a good eye doctor when you have your eye problems. There was a reference to what happened to my country. And here, I would like, before I come to this point of if private enterprise is always better than state enterprise, let me tell you, last year, in America, we lost more than 1 million jobs. And the country has a huge deficit. In the state of Texas, our budget, we have budget surplus of $200 billion. And we have added 250,000 jobs in the state income tax. We have no corporate profit tax. The only tax you pay in Texas is 8% sales tax. It takes half a day to open your firm, costs you only $10. And as I said again yesterday, our Chamber of Commerce published a very interesting book, very 300-page thick, called Business Regulations in Texas. Every page is empty. Now, that is what free market can do. We are truly free market, same as you are, free market in the island of Europe. We are free market in the island of the United States. And the results show the difference. I think is private property always better than state enterprise? If I use that word, it's wrong to use. To use ever is silly. It cannot be right. The question is it better? And the way to judge it is not to look at the outcome. And this is the difference between neoclassical and Austrian economics that I like about Austrians. You don't look at the outcome. Because if you are judging performance by the outcome, then you, in effect, are supporting the role of the state to seek outcome. You are judging, you are asking, what are the incentives? What does it mean to have a privately owned firm? How do you define privately owned? It's not about building, not about machines. Privately owned firm is a firm that has three rights. The owner has the right to the residual, he has the right to hire and fire employees, and he has the right to sell those rights. He has then every conceivable incentives to move heaven and earth to produce efficiency. He can fail and do worse than the state enterprise, but that will be because he is incapable, not because of the system. In the state enterprise, the man who makes decisions does not bear the cost. In private firm, there is a perfect marriage between making decisions and bearing the consequences. Now, Havel. You know, I had a Liberty Fund I had a conference in Dallas 2 years ago, and I heard about a Russian who used to be advisor to Putin and then broke away from him. The name may sound familiar, may not, I don't know, Illarionov. I invited him to my conference and he came. And at that conference he confirmed what I always felt. I have never met a Russian whom I want to see again. He was arrogant, but that's okay. Most people are arrogant because sometimes you hide the inferiority complex. But the problem was that when pressed on the issues, it was always the government can do it. What I was saying, what I was trying to say, and probably had not been effective, is that if you grow up, if you work under a regime like the communist regime, if you go to school, if you are part of the system for 4 years, your culture, by culture I mean your reaction to issues, is somehow ingrained. You become intuitively, every time you face a problem, you don't do like Reagan. Look, in 1980, Obama tells you that this is the worst economic crisis ever, and he lies. In 1980, we had much worse situation. We had 18% interest rates, 12% inflation, 10% unemployment, and no growth. What did he do? There were no bailouts, no subsidies. He cut the taxes and told people, go and look after yourself. In 2 years, the economy was growing. And was growing there for 40 years. Until Bushes came and now, I am saying this simply that there is a culture that when you face the problem, you go where you feel at home. And this is why I gave you the table. How on earth do you explain that you are freer now, in general, but in terms of two very important categories, which are very typical of the communist culture, you are worse off. Now, on this point, I'm not convinced. But again, I'm not saying the worst thing we can do is to try to defend each other. Let's look for the truth. Now, the Havel. I think that the situation with Havel is totally different from the one they talk about communists. There are two ways in which in the West we try to develop our economies, our societies. There is something that is generally known as Anglo-American capitalism and the continental capitalism. French model, German model, Swedish model, or Anglo-American model. They are all post-communist, non-communist phase of developing society. And I think the disagreement between Havel and Klaus was with respect to the choice of one of those models. I could be wrong. Now, Yugoslavia. I really do not know much about the difference between communists in Yugoslavia and communists in your part of the world. When I was growing up in Yugoslavia, I was doing my best to avoid them. And I never got to know your communists. So again, I'm talking from the position, it has nothing to do with one country or another. Simply, my own research has convinced me that culture matters. The transition is a cultural, not technical problem. The final point I made, Mr. Triska is quite right. Well, how do you make things credible? Because unless the laws are credible, unless institutions are credible, it doesn't matter how good they sound. Look, Stalin's constitution was probably the most wonderful constitution the man has ever invented. But what did it mean? There is a man, the man who wrote our constitution, James Madison, said in one of the Federalist papers, if you want to preserve freedom, and by freedom he meant what? Freedom means that individual, that your rights are protected against the will of a majority. The democracy has a huge problem. It's the same as dictatorship. The majority can do anything it wants to the minority. The only difference is that every 4 years you can change who is oppressor. But to protect that, Madison said the term constitution must come before the term democracy. And James Buchanan, in our days, has said exactly the same thing 200 years later. But I agree with, I think that my initial reaction to I simply think that Klaus is by far the best thing that has ever happened, not only to your country, but to Eastern Europe. I was hoping when Montenegro became independent 2 years ago, that there would be two islands of democracy, Montenegro and Czech Republic. I've given up on Montenegro. For God's sake, make sure we don't give up on you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I guess now it's time to open the floor for discussion. We have a mic here, so please speak to the mic. We record the session so that people who couldn't make it can listen to it as well. So comments, suggestions, questions. Wait for the mic, please.
1, 2, okay. How's the dear leader in North Korea? What is unique about totalitarian regimes is that they eliminate all alternative elites. That's what's done usually in the revolutionary stage. So at the point of transition, there are no lawyers, there are no entrepreneurs, there's nobody to actually replace the existing elite. And that was true in Germany just as it was true here. I mean, Nazis were still running Germany way into the late 60s. That's what part of the 68 revolution there was about, to get out this elite. So we started the transition process with a situation where there's really hardly anybody to replace. So the few dissidents that we had here were the Havel and his group, and then Havel knew Klaus from 68, from Tvarz. So we're talking about a couple of thousand people who were actually able to replace other people. So they had to use whatever communist opportunists they could use, because there was really nobody else. And then there's a problem of chicken and egg, because one thing you can do, you can wait until you have a legal framework. That will take at least 5 years. If the state really goes for it, they can import, let's say, 200 law professors from America, open law school, get 10,000 lawyers within 5 years. In the meanwhile, everything gets stolen by the managers. The other way you can do it is you can distribute vouchers. Now, the people who own the vouchers can't control the managers still steal everything. Then the state gets hysterical, instruct the state banks to, because the state still owns the bank, to buy back the vouchers, and then we move in circle. Eventually everything gets stolen, and then eventually everything gets sold to foreign companies, which is probably what they should have done in the first place. What exactly is the solution here in chicken and egg? Because it seems that it seems to be that irrespective of the policy that you choose, the nomenclatura gets the properties. So what would be the actual difference between the policies that you are proposing and the policy that Mr. Chiska is proposing? Yeah, the result would be the same, unless you open the market to begin with. You give all the properties to, let's say, a big accounting firm, and you say we'll just sell it to the highest bidder, which would be foreigners, and then we'll just distribute the money equally in the population, kind of Alaska style. Only instead of oil, it's the state industries.
Thank you, Professor Tucker. Now please use this mic to respond.
No, foreigners were blocked from bidding at the initial privatization process.
If I could add to your question, to Mr. Pejovich, because we should use him, In your paper, you strongly criticize Russia, that they started the privatization program without the system of property rights protection. You quote even Putin, I understand, as I remember well, and you are strongly critical about this, so what else should they do? What other policies would they? They also attempted vouchers, and they messed up, of course, with vouchers because they didn't have the technique and the discipline and the system. But in a way, you criticize the Russian oligarchs, definitely, and I would be much more tolerant to this outcome of Russia, namely because I compare it with Belarus, Kazakhstan, other ex-Soviet countries in which I also visited, and the government of which I also advised. So why this criticism about Russia? In this sense, you are on the same side like Joseph Stiglitz. I apologize, but he also is so sharply critical about Russia. What's your fundamental criticism about the process of privatization in Russia? What other way could they take?
The question is clear. Thank you.
I think they could have done what you did. There's no harm. And then to say they are doing better than Belarus. Big deal. Who is not? I think that, and I have to admit
some comments about your view of the communist regimes, because moreover Yugoslavia was not accepted as a normal communist regime by the other states, not only since Tito but even in the 1980s. And if you take Czechoslovakia, even in the normalization times in 1980s, property rights were respected. The problem was that almost no one had these property rights recognized, but when they were recognized, they were respected. Officially, everything belonged to the state. It was respected as well. If you take Hungary, Hungary in 1980s asked for IMF loans and they got it. One of the conditions was respecting property rights, and actually there was a possibility of having even own firms in Hungary since 1982. So Israel, the communist times were very different. Thank you.
By the way, what country are you from? You are Czech, okay. Well, yeah, I also, well, it was a comment, or was it a question there? Was it something you want to hear our speakers to respond to?
Sorry. Well, I had also a question, but actually, no, you said we could comment. Well, I would like maybe some opinion about it, because, like, I don't consider, I don't like the simplification myself that some countries are just bad and some countries are like just good. I wanted just to precise one of the comments against Mr. Prekovich's theories. It was a comment
About differences of particular regimes and a way how to, or whether it's possible to generalize.
Yes, communism is not one.
Okay, good. Well, whether the situation was not that the differences between individual countries were that big, so there's no way of putting all Central and Eastern European countries into one basket, because simply it's not, they were different. Private regime in Poland and Hungary.
Of course, there are huge differences. The culture of Central and Eastern Europe is not homogeneous, and it's not homogeneous due to the centuries of influence of the three empires and three religions. You go down to the Balkans, you go to the eastern Russia, you go to Czechoslovakia. If you visit part of Europe, if you visit Eastern Europe, was part of Austro-Hungarian monarchy, you will find different culture, different way of life, different expectations from life, different way people relate to each other than you find in Yugoslavia, where you still can feel Turkish influence, or in Russia, or Eastern Poland. Sure that we cannot put them together, but there is one thing that's common though to all Eastern Europe. It's a culture of extended family, as opposed to the nuclear family in the West. And the extended family means something that could be very dangerous, especially if you go further south and southeast. It means what? It always comes to be them and us. It's a nuclear family which has made possible for people. What was the major effect of the nuclear family in the West? To develop the law of commerce. Because instead of dealing with the members of your own clan, you had to deal with people across the family lines. And if you deal with people in your own clan, you have eternal rules that have to be obeyed. Once you have to deal across the family lines, you need certain rules because you are dealing with people whose culture you don't know, whose behavior you cannot predict. So you have to develop the law of commerce developed. Recently a book was published by Professor Greif from Stanford, showing tremendous difference between how the law of commerce developed in Genoa in the 11th century compared to the contracts within the Arabic world in the same time. And that's what I meant when I said culture is extremely important. That's what neoclassical economics simply did not incorporate into the model.
Okay. Christian Michel, comment or question?
Thank you very much, because it's fascinating debate. And but at this stage,
Thank you for that.
well, to both. there isn't a debate if both are not engaged. But I would like to put in a good word for the privatization in Russia, even if it doesn't make me popular with you, Professor Pejovich, because I think the situation in Russia was slightly different from the other Eastern European countries in three senses. One, that Russia was a hyperpower, and it had, and people perceived in the country that they were part of a, the only opponent of the United States at the time, and it gave them an enormous nationalist pride, which obviously governments were able later on to play on with. The second thing is that the economy of Russia was commodity-based. It was entirely based on oil, gas, copper, metals, timber, and so on. And therefore, these properties had a world value, which properties in other European countries, Eastern European countries, didn't have, in the sense that they were all bankrupt industrial companies. And when selling the estate, the assets of Russia, the government was faced either to sell them at world market prices, and no Russian could have bought them, because what does it mean to be part of a socialist country is that you do not have capital. So no Russians could have bought these assets. Of course, the voucher process would mean that all the assets could have moved to millions and millions of Russians. But if you are the manager of a company that is owned by millions of shareholders, really you are still totally non-accountable to your shareholders. So I think the process of moving the assets to a nucleus of entrepreneurs that would act as the owners, would be able to fire the managers, would have a vested interest in developing the asset, in developing the company, was probably the best thing to do. The problem, I think, was that then the state should not give these managers any protectionist preferences, any subsidies, any advantages. And that is where the state has failed. And then there was a problem of anti-Semitism, which was brought in addition to this, because all the oligarchs who ended up owning these companies were all Jews. And there are historical reasons for this, but I mean, it's too long to get into this now.
I started by saying my position is to seek the truth, not to defend position. I honestly will tell you this, that after listening to Mr. Tristan and listening to you, and we talked some more yesterday, I don't think I have changed my mind, but when I go back home, I'm going to rethink the whole issue. That's all I can tell you. Because if I was not convinced that two of you have made the point, I would not have said it. But I want to call your attention to two things, to two examples. Because when you are rethinking that issue, when you talk about a country that had to do something like commodity to sell, let me give you two examples from history. In the early 1950s, Africa and Eastern Asia became free from the colonial regimes about the same time. In terms of economic development, they were about the same level of economic development. And they were sort of one or two commodity producers: cocoa, coffee, rice. Within 20 years, Africa regressed. East Asia is competing with you guys, and certainly with us too. Now the question, what happened? And the answer is they have accepted and made property rights credible. Africa chose to develop its own type of socialism. Another example was 16th century England and Spain. They had only one product, mostly gold, sheep. And they were about the same level of economic development. Doug North wrote about it. And by the beginning of the 17th century, England was a power and Spain was aggressive. Why? One reason is that, of course, the property rights were threatened in England, while in Spain, in order to get taxes from sheep owners, the king allowed them to move sheep from one pasture to another to feed. In that way, they eroded quality of land. And in the short run, king got more taxes, but in the long run, the economic development suffered. So one has to rethink those issues in many ways. But I think, if anything I have so far, what I have gotten from coming here is simply I came to a beautiful country. But I have also received some very good inputs from you and Mr. Trisky.
That's wonderful. Mr. Trisky, you want to comment on Russia or anything else? No? Okay, he's here with us, so we can manage even thousands of questions, I'm sure. Any other comments? Yes, the mic please here.
Leszek Jurczak from Poland. Sorry for my voice. But there is a popular saying that the first million, $1 million of the business usually is stolen. Is it true that we can build the free market economy in such a way on stolen goods? The Poland is a good example. There was no decommunization. Lustration was not ended until now. And the former communists, prepared for themselves a very nice landing in the new systems. In the late 80s, they took over a lot of state-owned companies that became the private, but private in hands of former communists. And now the system in Poland is mostly built on such the beginning. What is your comment on building the free market on stolen goods?
Question is clear. Robber Baron story. Okay.
Go ahead.
My comment on this is anti-term stolen. It's so complicated. We know that the legal procedures to prove, that somebody stole something may take decades and without any ending to prove it. And so, but we have some bad feelings about the process. We definitely have some bad feelings. And my question, again, mostly to Mr. Pejovich is, privatization is in fact one form of financial speculation. It's a speculative activity. There are many participants of Czech privatization who lost all their investment, who hoped, to become rich and who ended up very badly, economically speaking. And financial speculators never in no country have good reputation. They always are. There's always a suspicion, at least, that they are stealing, in fact, the money. They are not producing anything. They are not producing Coca-Cola. They are not making cars. They are speculating. They are speculating financially with some assets. And they have bad reputation even in America. Now, rightly so, I suppose, in America. But how can a privatizer have a good reputation? By definition, never, never, ever.
I don't know, but I would like to defend speculators. I think they are performing an extremely important social function. Let me give you an example. Suppose that we have a very good year, agricultural year. Lots of wheat is around, and the price is very low. But suppose that there is some rumor or some indication the next year is going to be very bad year. So, if nothing happens, the price of food will double next year, and many people will not be able to afford it. weather is not bad next year, who bears the cost? He does. So I think that in that sense, another example from your everyday life here, a great football game, and you are a medical doctor, if you go to wait in line for a ticket, if you are in private medicine, 1 hour is worth you $5,000. It's not worth your while to wait in the line for the ticket. It costs too much. So what you do, you buy ticket from people, students who have lots of time, they wait in line, they buy tickets, and they sell them scalpers on the side. And they call them speculators. But my God, they have moved the resource to the highest value user and reduce the cost to society and to doctor of going to a game. So I don't have that wrong feeling about speculation.
Yeah, thank you. Any other comment first from those who have not yet asked, and if there's nobody left, then we may have second questions for active people. Yeah, so go ahead.
Hello again. I would like to have a question about your, again about the decommunization, as you said, because most revolutions with arms killed the elite and then had no one to reign. We did not. And I would say that the managers of the state-owned firms were managers, at least. I don't say they were good managers, but they were the only managers we had. So in some ways, for some firms, it was better maybe to keep them, even if they used to wear the communist shirt, I would say. Or would you have another solution? Thank you.
So I'm a little bit surprised with the statement, strong, sharp statement by my colleague. No, my teacher, my guru, who would say, who knows that it's the institutional frame which creates motivations and capacity of people and their activity, and given the institutional frame of central planning, let's call it this way, or socialism, real socialism, communism whatsoever, people simply behave, they optimize, how they optimize, they behave how they behave, rationally, given the institutional frame. Once the institutional frame changes, the people adopt their behavior, change their motivation, change their activities, and so on. And the fact that they behave differently 5 years ago wouldn't tell me too much, wouldn't tell me. They may be indoctrinated, yes, the cultural burden there is, but in North Korea again, my friends and colleagues from Europe say, this is stubborn communism. Look at the badges, Kim Jong-il everywhere, red flags. And say, you will be surprised how overnight they will throw this over this. They will be overnight. It will happen immediately, instantly, just like it had happened in my country, just like it happened elsewhere.
Look at what's happening now in the United States after 200 years of capitalism. The culture of Keynes is still alive. How do people on the left react to this crisis? By going to the government. And if that is true after 200 years of capitalism in America, why would I believe that they would not do so 5 or 10 years after the end of capitalism? And also in America, you can notice where it's happening. If you go to the highly industrialized states, where the labor unions are strong, New York, California, Michigan, Ohio, Illinois, you will find the people, the reaction. Every time there is a problem, the reaction is, let the government control. If you come to the South, 1988 was worth about $400 million. And then he made some really bad investments in loan and saving banks, which went bankrupt in 1988. And he was down, literally down, to $2 million from 400. And then I asked him, he did not go to Washington. What he said to me and to others, because the friends, he said, look, that's what capitalism is about. One day you are winning, another day you're losing. That's the kind. That you will not hear in the East, you will not see in New York. So I think that culture lasts longer than people. I observed it. Let me tell you one more story. I was driving, my university is 200 miles from my home. And I was driving at night home. And you drive through the central Texas, it's almost you're like behind the God's back. There's nothing. And my car broke down in the middle of nowhere. And I knew at 10 o'clock at night, there would be only one car passing by every hour. And you never know who is going to pass it by. So I said, a pickup truck came and stopped. And the man came out of the truck with a huge Texas hat and his face 1 inch thick, like no farmers. He was younger than I, but he said, son, what's your problem? I said, I have no problem, my car has the problem. And he said, well, the nearest gasoline station was before cell phones. The nearest gasoline station was 40 miles. He said, I take you to the gasoline station. I said, are you going that way? He said, no, I take you there. I got in his car. Now, if you get into a pickup car in Texas, it's like being in the military barracks. You have guns over the place, from left and right. You don't have cannons, but you have all sorts of carabines and guns. And he was driving, and I said, you know, you could have killed me. He said, oh, but this is not New York, this is Texas. And then he turned to me and said, are you a professor? I said, yes. He said, are you one of those professors who believe in the United Nations? I said, no, I would like them out of America. He said, good, otherwise you'll get out of my car. So finally he got me to the gasoline station. I said, could I please pay? The answer was, just do the same thing for somebody else. That's
Culture matters, yeah. Any questions here? So first, very back.
Let me just ask you something about the data here, because I see that the Czech Republic deteriorated between 1996 to 2005 here. Now, in 1996, there were no bankruptcies here, and the banks were owned by the government. So how on earth did they get to this data of things deteriorating since then?
well, you're talking about the numbers of the credit.
Yes. Yes.
Well, I have nothing to do with how they did it, but I tell you what I do know. The index has been tested. The index has been tested both in Europe by academics, both in Europe and the United States. And with, like all indexes, it has problems. But it has passed the, by and large, it has passed the test. But there is a big evidence, the outside academic world, that shows you that the index is taken seriously. One is that every time the index is published, the Heritage Foundation, I'm associated with them and I know, they receive dozens of calls from the embassy who complain about the position. Now, if it meant nothing, they would have not bothered, right? And the second is that there are many investors who are waiting for index to come out before they make their final decisions. Those things I do know. How they get numbers, they don't do it in Washington. In every country, they have two avoid two different competing groups to avoid monopolizing or dishonesty, to have a check and balance. And they get the numbers. So how correct the numbers are, you can only keep your fingers crossed. But that's the best we can.
All right. Our next question.
Yeah, Fernando Herrera from Polytechnic University of Madrid. I was wondering, not much about that, but I know is about.
Use the mic, please.
Okay. Yeah. What I know is that according to economic theory, if you let the resources flow freely in the market, they will end up in their right places in order to maximize efficiency and service to the citizens. So from that point of view, and forgetting about just this consideration, I mean, former ownership of properties, I could say that the important thing is not who is the first owner of the property when you come from, you know, a fully stratified government or where the property is fully owned by the government. I would say that the property, the initial property, once the government is down, is not the important thing. The important thing is having no regulation in place. Because if you have regulation in place, resources won't flow to their most useful places with independence of the ownership, where it's not so relevant who is the first ownership, because economic theory tells us that the resource will, I mean, for example, if you give telecom to a guy who does not have any idea about telecom, he won't be able to deal with these assets the right way, and eventually society will remove from them, being by, how do you say, broken. I mean, he will have to let the control of enterprise to advertise, because shares will go lower prices. You could buy for less than their right price, and you know the usual devices where by money of the market works. The question is, if you agree with this point, I mean, would you say that most important thing is regulation, or do you still maintain that initial ownership is the most important thing?
I guess we understand original assignment of rights is not important. Market process will take care of the rest. There's a question heavily discussed here and elsewhere. So I guess Dr. Tricka is the right person
Yes,
to answer.
we perfectly agree, and this philosophy exactly, that the initial owner doesn't matter. You know, that what matters is the efficient market for property rights. This was the initial statement behind voucher privatization, and not only for the reasons you mentioned, which are very, very essential, of course, and also for practical reasons, because in our case we had altogether 4,000 state-owned enterprises, and any attempt to look for and to find an optimal strategic owner is a technically impossible task. In general, in particular in the society, in the country where the government doesn't exist and emerges, you know. So it would, we calculated it would take us 400 years to privatize 4,000 enterprises in the speed Margaret Thatcher did in Great Britain. So not only what you say, but technically it's impossible. We are trying to privatize Unipetrol for second decade, you know. Unipetrol is a major company in this country, and it's very complicated, not only technically but also politically, of course, you know. So it's like monopoly game. Simply distribute the property, and the market will take care of the rest, if it's efficient. And criticism of Professor Pejovich is how to take care of that market for property rights, of course. Then anything can happen in this market, and the moral issues are at stake, and efficiency, economic efficiency also. So this is the topic, you know. This is the problem. How to organize the post-privatization secondary market. This is the problem.
Also, it's very easy for us, all of us, to criticize what Klaus did. It's like talking about football game on Monday morning. He had to face the problem that was never faced before. He had to make decision not having a president to
European Union. You as a sort of partly outsider, but also partly as an insider with the American experience, with what can happen with an attempt to create a federation. How do you see the process? How is it worthwhile to, let's say, try to slow it down a little bit, or what are the dangers of having perhaps too much of a European Union?
I think the European Union is a danger to both free market and individualism. When Montenegro became independent 2 years ago, I went to see Mr. Đukanović, Prime Minister, and I talked to him. I said, you have a unique opportunity now. European Union is going to create such a strange closed market. You know, they just passed a rule that how thick cucumbers have to be, how red tomatoes have to be. I have also example paper showing that they were arguing very seriously about providing pigs with toys because they'd be bored, they commit suicide. You know, I think that they're going nuts. And I said that could be going to raise the prices immensely against the outside. I said, instead of joining the union, become a Macau. You're a small island, small place, 600,000 people. Nobody will pay attention to what you're doing. Become smugglers, the country of smugglers. You can get rich by selling lots of stuff to European Union. Foolishly enough, he would not listen to me. He thought I was kidding. I was not kidding. Macau was a very healthy community. So was Hong Kong. So was Singapore. He said like to be Monte Carlo. Forget Monte Carlo. Become a Macau. No, I have given up. I honestly believe that the European Union is a great idea. Free trade, but why do you need Brussels for that? All you need is one paper, one sheet of the paper saying no tariffs. Free movement of goods and resources.
No taxes, that would help too.
As we finish, if I just tell you, I was, people quite often say, what's your culture? I have none. I was born in Montenegro and I ended up in Texas. How could I have any culture? No. So, but I tell you still, a joke from Texas, it shows you the culture of Texas. They all carry guns. I mean, that's unbelievable. If you try to take guns away from people there, and that's a second amendment in our constitution, we will have a revolution, literally. Well, but there is a story. A man came home and saw his wife with another guy, and he pulled his gun, and put against his head. His wife started laughing. He said, "Don't laugh. You're next."
Last question or comment? No, it's all being recorded, don't worry. The bad guys will find you eventually.
This is a question for Professor Pejovich. You say that culture lasts longer. You say that culture lasts, but in America we feel from Europe that there's a switch in culture, and the former settlers' culture, where people feel that they would make it if they want to, is disappearing for a more socialist culture. How do you explain this, and do you think it comes from immigration?
Well, it's an amazing question. I will answer the best I can. I do know America. I've been there now for 50 years. When you come from the outside, different culture, you appreciate more what you see than you already raised. culture of America, first of all, the American Constitution is the longest surviving constitution in the world. There is no constitution that can survive 240 years. And that constitution has only 5 articles and 27 amendments, which means over 220 years it was changed only 27 times. And why it is, so the purpose of a constitution is to protect the minority against the majority. And this is why constitution has to be very difficult to change. In America, the system is made such a way that 6% of the people could effectively block any constitutional change. So changing constitution is very important. So you live within the same cultural framework as defined in 1787. That was a framework that people, who are the people who came to America? They were people who were running away from the king, from the church, from the feudal regime, who wanted to try ideas of John Locke and David Hume, who wanted to be free, free to create their own life. And that, what they created was life based on 3 principles: self-interest, self-determination, self-responsibility. That was the prevailing mode of life until Roosevelt in 1929-31, who brought big government in. Actually, the 10th Amendment in America says very explicitly, these are the functions of the federal government. There are 4 or 5. Everything else that we know or become known belongs to the state. Still in America, we have no federal education program, we have no federal police, we have no federal family law. They are all different. The laws in Texas differ very much from those in New York. If you divorce in New York, you get alimony. If you divorce in Texas, you split property 50-50. Nobody asks you who is guilty. Enormous differences from one state to another. And those differences represent what? Culture that was developed within those enclaves. And they remain that. So what you have today in the East and the West, they are becoming more like your country and Germany, social democracies. But you come to Idaho, you come to Utah, you come to Oklahoma, you come to Texas outside Austin, you will find the culture of the West. When Sarah Palin came, McCain's candidacy was going nowhere. Then he appointed Sarah Palin, and she revitalized. Why? She brought the West back to America. She was the spirit of the West. She hunts her own food. That was what people said. Every time she goes to some place to give a talk today, she gets thousands of people to come to this talk. She is going to be the president, if not in 4 years, in 8 years. Because she is reviving what America was about and what was being lost. The culture is, the habits change, but it's easy to change the law. Let me ask you this question. Suppose you have 2 communities, a very atheistic community and a very Catholic community, and you pass the law that says abortion is okay. No. Or you pass the law that says, no, abortion is not okay. What will happen? In the community which is not very religious, you are going to very high transaction cost to enforce the law. In the Catholic community, you will not. The culture makes difference.
I guess that's all for today. We are running out of time. I thank you, Professor Pejovich. Thank you, Dr. Friska. All the remaining questions can be discussed later. And my last duty is not done yet. My last duty is to officially end up the 2009 Prague Conference on Political Economy. I thank you all who participated. I thank you for your papers. Just want to remind you that if you have a paper you want to publish, send me an email submitted to the offspring of the conference, which is the journal, professional journal, referee journal, New Perspectives on Political Economy. I'll be happy to send to my referees and eventually publish if it's good paper. And also let me remind you that there will be slight difference in organizing the conference next year, and that's exactly because of our great speaker next year, who is going to be Richard Epstein, who is a world-leading legal scholar, a world-leading law and economist, and he's going to be here in Prague in the middle of March, so we do not have the exact days yet, but it's the PCPE, hence is not going to take place in April, which is typically the case, but in March. I'll complement Professor Epstein to a famous Austrian scholar, so that we have, as always, a true Austrian and then an Austrian-friendly free marketeer, and we are going to have a wonderful conference. So please come back to Prague, and I'll be very happy to host you. For the benefit of the Czech audience here, I just want to remind you we have books, new books in Czech, Margot Bart's Ethics of Liberty, and a book by Professor Halpern